I didn't have time, Sarah. I was in a hurry this morning, and apologies to everyone. I didn't have a chance to put my makeup on, so this pale, pink, whatever, it's what we got. Sorry, guys. But if I hide my video, that would defeat the purpose of this. All right, let's go on.
You're good, Dean. All right.
All right, let's roll along. All right.
Beautiful. So we have already done our welcome message. We're a little bit behind on time because we took a little extra time with the introductions, but we're going to go ahead and move into the next 30 minutes are going to be the presentation and our hands-on workshop. So we will be having everybody participate in a couple of exercises, and then we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Sujatha and to Tony.
All right, so as Sarah mentioned, this is a labor of love. We really want to help people, particularly in the Agile world, to achieve greater mastery, regardless of their Agile role. And we have discovered in our practice that one of the greater impediments to effective practice in the Agile world is in the soft skills arena. It's in emotional intelligence and social intelligence. So any chance we can have to boost that with people, and particularly with ourselves, we'll be more productive. We're going to share a model for our human psychological experience that we find very powerful in helping people unscramble some of the complexity in their minds. And the interesting thing is, we didn't start our book with a model. We started it as a very practical workbook to guide people through exercises so that they could self-discover these kinds of skills and develop them. But when we concluded with our final chapter, we realized that really our experience breaks down to 3 key levels. And in looking at the literature that we considered in writing our book, from the psychological world, from the neuroscience world, and from the meditative practice worlds in Buddhism and Kriya Yoga and other practices, we found that they all say kind of the same thing with different words. So we're going to share with you the model that gives context to the exercises, which is the inverse of how we wrote the book. But we figured in this kind of presentation, we should let the cat out of the bag and let you in on this secret. So without further ado, we're going to skip past some of this in the interest of time. Let's go ahead and get into our model. These are just
great reviews here talking about how Sujatha and Tony typically are recognized for having great expertise when it comes to the self-mastery aspect. And you guys can look at this on the recording later in further detail, but I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, and understandably, nobody's comfortable boasting, but it does turn out that in our particular practice over the years, the greater highlights we get from leaders, from executives, from team members is the fact that we seem to have a knack for helping them in the soft skill self-mastery arena. And so that's why we figured we'd have something to offer and decided to take on this task of writing a book about it. Sujatha?
Okay, so anybody that's doing Agile might be familiar with this wheel. It is called the Agile Growth Wheel from Agile Alliance, right? If you look at the wheel, there's 3 layers to it. The core is self-mastery, right? So even with this model, you know, it also closely aligns with this the spiritual models too, right? As being, right? So if you're completely with you and you are being as a human being and not worried about anything else that goes outside of, you know, all of the thoughts and worries and all of that stuff, you're still a human being, right? So and then once you have that self-mastery, all of these other core competencies to be a successful Agile coach would become a lot more efficient, right? I'm not saying that you can't do all of these things and you cannot master all of these things without self-mastery. You could still do it, but the way, the efficiency, and the way you perform these activities is going to be significantly different, right? So you're going to be a lot more effective. So the being is the self-mastery, and then you do some of the activities, right? And when you do some of the activities, then you can, which can result into all of the other things that you see on the outer circle, right? The visionary, the advising mindset, all of these things can be achieved very easily. So you can see on the left, and Tony also mentioned previously, the greatest obstacle for agility is people. If you can focus on people, helping them become, master of their own self, then all of these things could be a lot more efficient and effective.
So we want to highlight, and this is from Lisa Atkins, author of Coaching Agile Teams. She sets up a standard of 10 abilities and mindsets that one should have to be, in particular, an Agile coach, which is our profession. But these are relevant, I think, to all roles. And the uncanny ability to read a room, our social intelligence, our ability to see what people are feeling, how they're responding, how they're reacting, that depends on self-mastery. If I enter a meeting, or whether I'm leading it or it's a one-on-one, and I'm caught up in my own thoughts, my own assumptions, my own biases, my own anxieties and imposter syndrome, that's going to block me from actually being present and reading the room. And so these are some, I wouldn't say arguments, but evidence for why self-mastery really does matter. We mentioned that we draw from many, many disciplines. So Sujatha and I have reformulated certain things and provided some practical guidance, but we don't claim to be the founders or creators of any of this. These traditions are thousands of years old. And what's interesting about our thought partnership is that there is a sort of East meets West, in that I come from a more scientific background as a pre-med student. I majored in physics at New York University. And so while I did enter mindfulness practices through Zen Buddhism, I like evidence, I like research, I like proof, I like experiments. And I find that in books like Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, or Lisa Feldman Barrett's How Emotions Are Made. So the West is catching up. Interestingly, there's been a lot of research at major research universities on meditators, particularly Buddhist monks. Harvard did one, Harvard Medical School did one that was very fascinating to me. I heard it on the Hidden Brain podcast on NPR with Shankar Vedantam. And it was an experiment where they took Buddhist monks and non-practitioners, and they subjected them to very painful stimulation. They wrapped a cuff around their wrist that would pump extremely hot water. And if anybody's ever gotten tattoos, you know the wrist is a very, very sensitive area. But, if you get a tattoo on your wrist, you're brave. And so the water was hot enough to cause severe pain, but not any burn, because that area, again, is very sensitive. They would play a tone, and 20 seconds after the tone, they would deliver this very sharp pain to the wrist. And they had the participants in a brain scan. And here's the interesting finding. Those who were non-meditators, when they heard the beep, their brain went into a very strong pain and anxiety reaction for 20 seconds. Then they experienced the pain, and their brain continued to be in an agitated state. And after the painful stimulus was withdrawn, they remained in an agitated state. The Buddhist monks, on the other hand, these trained meditators, they heard the beep and they remained perfectly calm for 20 seconds. No disturbance in the brain activity whatsoever. This is a Harvard Medical School study, and it's quite validated. When the pain was delivered, they received a sharper brainwave for the pain. They were mindful, they were present, they embraced and accepted and felt the pain very completely. Then, immediately after the shock was gone, their brain went right back to a normal state, no pain.
Wow.
When they interviewed participants after, and they asked them to describe the pain, the non-meditators gave very vague descriptions. There was a lot of panic in them. The Buddhist monks were able to describe in detail the type of pain they were feeling: a pinching, a tingling, a pressure. And this is consistent with the nerve endings we have in our skin. We have pressure sensors, we have temperature sensors, we have moisture sensors. And I'm not an expert, but a dermatologist can tell you there's very specific nerve cells for different receptions, and they combine to create a mental model. The Buddhists were very accurate about exactly what they felt at the sequence of feelings. So once again, this is an East meets West to combine and pretty much say the same thing.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and share our model with you again, which we feel is quite consistent with what we've read, studied, and seen in the field. Sujatha?
Right. So this is our egg model. This is our way to present some of the concepts in a very easy way, understandable way for everybody. So you see, in the egg has 3 layers. There is a shell, there is the whites, and then the yolk. Right. So the persona is all of the expression that we have. Right. How do we actually express from one person to the other? For example, how I interact with my father is going to be completely different than how I interact with my husband, right? So how I interact with my friend versus how I interact with my manager, right? I wouldn't be the same, be saying the same things the same way, not the same, I mean, it could be the same context, but the way I would express would be completely different, right? What I would say and what I would do with them is going to be different. And it's perfectly fine, right? We want all of us to be able to, be aware of all of the situations that we are in and the context that we play in, and pick those personas as appropriate, right? That's perfectly fine. But what is going on with a lot of people that I see, right, in the organization, they feel like they want to be so authentic, right? They want to be their true self, and they say that, oh, I can like say whatever I want, and because I'm so authentic, I have the true intentions, it should be fine. But that's where I see a lot of like coaches, leaders, scrum masters, you name it, right? Any of those roles would be having those friction, right? So they don't know what to say and what time, and how to express appropriately, right? So,
Right. And
go
that's
ahead,
our
Tony.
social intelligence on the outside shell. There's nothing inauthentic about presenting yourself in different manners, and we want to be flexible in our personas.
Yeah,
Right.
it demonstrates a good amount of tact to show
Yes.
an appropriate side. It also lets you be heard better. If I am presenting myself in one way to my manager and another way to my sister, like if I'm using my business terminology with my sister, she's not going to hear me very well, if at all. So I think that's a great point, Sujatha.
Yeah. So and then we go a little bit deeper to the white, right? So now, what is the white? It's all of the ego that we capture over the period of time, and we describe ego as all of the information that we have accumulated, growing, right, and becoming the person we are right now. So we could do a little thought experiment here, right? You ready for it? Okay, on. So if you can close your eyes for just 1 minute, right? Close your eyes and think about where you were when you were 5 years old, going to school for the first time. What do you see? What did you wear? What do you have around you? How did you feel? Just think about it for a second. Open your eyes. So look at you now. What is different? Anybody want to say?
Or
A lot of
physically
bias.
different? Please.
A lot of bias, a lot of carried judgment.
Mm.
Whereas my 5-year-old self, wide-eyed, excited about what's to come, nervous, anxious, fearful, happy, and innocent. No judgment, but very curious. And I'll tie it back to the points, Tony, that you were raising about, or from Lisa's book. All of those things, I think, and I'm not saying go back, but all of those things, when we watch this recording, I think we can all agree that every single one of those is rooted in curiosity.
Mm.
And so talking about self-mastery and talking about social, our social intelligence, how curious are we? so that we don't move into a judgment state.
Yep. So Dean,
Thank
you
you.
wanted to say something? Thank you, Chris. See your raise hand.
Yeah, I just had to get off of mute here. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I was thinking of this too simplistically. I was just like, man, I was so happy there in that my kindergarten classroom with my cool teacher, and just creating this sense of wonder and just sort of
Yeah.
taking it all in, just enjoying the moment. It
Yeah.
took me a
Yeah.
lot of decades to figure out, like, all right, how do I find out how to get work in a line of work that lets me enjoy that sense of wonder and fun. So
Yeah.
a little simpler.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. So it's all of that information from when you were a child to when you're to now. There's a lot of information that we gathered mentally, and there's a lot we carried physically, right? So we grew big, large size, and then our mind also we accumulated a lot of thoughts along with it, right? So that's all that we're referring that to as ego, right? And then if you're taking off that ego, and now you all attested to it, that it's your true self. What is your true self? Is really happy and curious, wanting to do just be happy and joyful, right? So we're able to understand the difference between these three things, then we may be able to do better decisions, right? Better judgments, or better ways of doing things. So with these mindful practices and with these, some of the techniques that we are offering in this book, we're hoping that, you would be able to see these three things, separate these three things so that it'll give you a clear way going forward, right?
So your essential self is the person who was in that kindergarten school full of wonder. Our egos over the year, through various injuries, training, successes, failures, and unfortunately sometimes traumas, accumulates this baggage that starts to surround and kind of compress the essential self. So when we unscramble the egg by doing some of these practices, we get closer to essential self. Essential self is always there. It's just kind of muted. It's kind of covered. Essential self is the person living the life. If you were born in a different culture, if you were born in a different time, if you were born to a different family, you would be a different person at the ego level, different information, but you would be the same essential self. And so for those who feel they may have lost some joy over the years, the essential self is still there. And these kind of unscrambling exercises can help to get you some distance from that.
Cool. We'll do one more exercise if you want to go back real quick, Tony.
Sure.
So one more exercise for all of us, right? So we'll have Tony do a stopwatch, right? So and then we'll have all of you guys hold your breath for as long as you can. And then take a look at Tony's stopwatch on his face.
Give me a
And
moment.
then,
Yeah.
yes,
I'm
and then
loading that, but it's running slow. Give me just a second. And when Sujatha counts to 3, take a comfortable breath. You don't have to go, but take a comfortable breath because that's all you're going to have until you give up. So I'm going to say, get a stopwatch going. And when she says 3, I'm going to start the timer and you're going to hold your breath. Sujatha?
you hold your breath and see the count on the screen, okay?
Mhm.
All right. 1, 2, 3, go.
And I'll add, continue holding your breath. When you're done, use your Zoom hand and your reactions to raise your hand so that we know you're done. You don't want anyone passing out. There's no failure or shame here. Just raise your hand when you're done.
All right. See a
All
few
right.
people raise their hands. All right. Thank you for participating. So how long were you able to hold your breath?
Ooh, a minute.
What was your
You guys want to put
experience?
into the chat what like how long you were able to hold it for?
Yeah. So how did that feel for you guys?
Dean. He's very specific.
All right, so I see 30 seconds, 26 seconds. The most is 60 seconds, right? That's what I see here on the chat. So, all right, now let's go to the next slide.
So this is an excerpt from our workbook, and we do start with this breathing. And this is
All
the
right.
next excerpt. What do you
Okay.
need to survive? Oh, sorry.
You go ahead. Go ahead.
I jumped in. Your car, your bike, or some other vehicle. It may be an important tool that gets you to work, but would you still be alive if it disappeared? What else do you need to survive? Home, clothes, friends, family, job. Imagine losing these. Don't think too seriously about this. It's only a thought experiment. There's no joy in imagining the loss of family and friends, but try to do it at least theoretically as an intellectual rather than emotional exercise. If you did lose any one or all of these things, would you still be alive? Air is your energy. Air is your life, your survival. Allowing yourself to freely enjoy this gift will relax your mind and energize your body. So our exercise book is in fact an exercise book. And those of us in the Agile community are familiar with the maturity levels of Shu, Ha, and Ri, which comes from martial arts. And Sarah, you're a martial artist. Can you tell us a little bit about the kata?
Yeah, absolutely. So the kata is basically a form that you practice over and over. Across various disciplines, you'll hear it called something different. In jiu-jitsu, we refer to it as drilling. You go through the same specific move set over and over and over again. Kata, you practice the same form over and over and over again. And this is very important because unfortunately for us, we are not Neo. This is not the Matrix. You can't just plug in and know something automatically. You have to practice it. So whether you read all of the books that we showed you at the beginning and do all of this workbook or not, you're not going to actually achieve growth unless you practice it over and over and over again. So the breathing exercises that we've talked about already are going to be really important, but you have to make the choice to practice those things yourself. It's going to be a very self-led thing. Martial arts, you'll learn from your teacher, but you have to do the practice. So I hope that gives a little bit of depth to the idea behind a kata.
Thank you, Sarah. Sujatha?
Yeah, so this is a little text from our book, chapter 2, I'm Here. This exercise helps you escape mental clutter and reconnect the real world, the external physical world in which you live. We can get so stuck in our own heads that we aren't really in the place called here or the time called now. Living in the here and now may take deliberate, conscious focus. But once you experience the benefits, you will never want to go back to your mental clutter.
So another kata or practice is to experience the moment you're in now and to consciously experience it. It goes back to the essential self we were talking about. It's there, but we get distracted by the ego noise and we're really not present. Now, physically, you are present whether you like it or not. The question is, are you aware of it? Are you enjoying the moment, or are you stuck in memory or imagination? Memory is the past and imagination is about the future. They both matter. No one's asking us to turn off our minds, but you can give your mind a rest and experience the moment. Then you become the master of the mind instead of the master the mind being your master. So we have exercises to help you really indulge in the present moment without all the ego noise. And again, it's not that we don't use our imagination, it's not that we don't think and feel, but we need to make sure that the essential self is at the driver's seat. Sarah, do you have any thought on that?
Yes. So as I mentioned, I'm a competitive martial artist. So I'll actually be in Las Vegas next week for the Masters Worlds tournament. It'll be my third attempt at a world's title. And I do a lot of coaching for other jujiteras and jujiteros on how to overcome anxiety, whether it's performance or competitive anxiety within a match. This is also really relevant in the corporate world, because if you are in the middle of a conversation with someone and it's maybe not going the way you want it to, or for example, you're in a match and you've made a mistake and it's not going the way you want it to, it's easy to get stuck in the future or in the past. If you're being anxious, you're thinking about, well, how am I going to overcome this? Like, how am I going to recover from the mistake that I made? You're not going to be thinking about the next right thing to do. So in a martial arts match, that might be like, which arm do I need to grab in order to flip this person, right? In the corporate world, it might be, who do I need to talk to next to de-escalate this? Or, you know, I feel really triggered right now. I feel really hot and heated. My face is flushed, all because I read this email and it made me think of the email Derek sent me 6 years ago when he fired me over email. Now you're living in the past, right? Like, so talking about how to come back to the present can help a lot to de-escalate some of those heated emotions and allow you to take a clearer path forward.
Thanks, Sarah. Sujatha?
So we have our third chapter is clouds. You've been tricked into believing thoughts are solid, that they're really real, that they're very, very important, and you need them to solve all your problems. So they demand your attention until the problems are solved. But the problems don't get solved. And you keep thinking and thinking and thinking, worrying and worrying.
There's a lot of talk nowadays about flow state, and I'm very pleased that flow state is really becoming a meme. What is flow state? Flow state, what we used to call being in the zone, is when you're so one with your activity that it's just, you are the activity and the activity is you. You're not distracted by all the noise in the ego. So thinking matters. In Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he delineates two types of mental processes. There's the instant intuitive thinking, and then there's the deliberative thinking, where you're really rationalizing and working something through. The problem is we tend to overwork the deliberative part. We tend to think over and over and over with word thought about things, whereas our gut, you might say, or our essential self already knows the answer. So again, nobody's suggesting we turn off our mental process. What we're trying to do is create a little distance between all the noise in the egg white, all the noise in the ego, and let the essential self make better choices about which aspects of the ego are appropriate and which are inappropriate for a particular situation. And so getting distance between ourselves and our thoughts is really powerful, because that's when you start to feel and understand, not just intellectually, but from experience, you are not your thoughts. I know several people, Chris and Dean, talked about their earlier experience at school and how they were free from judgment and enjoying the moment. That's because there wasn't a lot of word thought. There was so much curiosity about the world that you were seeing and smelling and hearing and touching, and you were right in that moment. And we can recover that. We can recover that without losing all the knowledge and wisdom and data we've accumulated over the years. We can still recover that particular perspective. That's essential self perspective.
So what if all of those thoughts, all of these mental arguments, all these worries weren't really as solid as they feel? What if they were just passing clouds that form all sorts of shapes only to dissolve into vague blobs again? What if you could observe your own thoughts and emotions from a distance, like a child watching clouds turn into dinosaurs, puppies, or mountains? What if you could let a bad thought fade on its own instead of wrestling with it, being chased by it, or trying to chase it away?
This was an incredible lesson for me personally. the concept that my emotions could be used for information to inform what decision and what step I wanted to take next, because previously I had felt very driven by my emotions and by my thoughts. Just having one thought come across, I was like, well, that must be the reality of it. That must be the truth of it, rather than taking the time to examine that thought and be like, is this actually like how I feel? And I personally developed a process of asking myself why multiple times. So let's say that we'll use the Derek email example again. So you see the email, you feel angry, you feel heated, ask yourself why? Why do I feel so upset at this email? And it's like, oh, I think actually that Bob from accounting used the same tone that Derek did 6 years ago. And that made me react to Derek from 6 years ago and not Bob from accounting. Or like in a different sense, maybe my boyfriend said something and it made me think of something that a bully said to me years ago or something like that. And so just asking yourself those why questions, is that actually the situation that I'm in right now? Is this how I want to respond? And using those emotions and those thoughts as information rather than as drivers was really helpful for me.
Thanks. That's fantastic, Sarah.
Thank you.
All right. So in chapter 3, we have a specific exercise that helps you achieve distance between the thoughts and the essential self, against unscrambling the egg, unscrambling the essential self from the ego. And obviously in clouds, they change shapes, and being aware that your thoughts kind of are auto-generated and they're not you, they're meant to serve you. Now that theoretically probably makes sense to most of us, but experiencing it is a kata. It's experiencing it over and over and over till it really becomes routine for you. Moving along. Now we get into social intelligence. So we've done chapters 1, 2, and 3. We skipped 4 and 5 because we're really trying to give you an overview. And the earlier chapters are in emotional intelligence and self-realization. And this is now about our social interactions.
All right, so our chapter 6 here is regaining your social connections. Shining a light on your triggers takes away some of their energy. Some people may be lucky, and a single exploration diffuses a whole trigger mechanism. But it is more common to explore them repeatedly, gradually reducing the gunpowder with each observation.
Be patient with yourself. You didn't consciously create these triggers. They are part of an automatic, unconscious, but faulty mechanism. They are false alarms warning you that any incident which remotely resembles a previous injury, upset, or trauma is identical, when in fact it's not. It's a new situation and a new opportunity to grow and become your better self. And that's what Sarah was sharing with us. And thank you, Sarah, for your experience. So this is another shoe level kata, is getting in touch with your triggers and getting some distance between the automatic reactions and more thoughtful, proactive reactions. Now, that's just a little taste of our book. It will be coming out very shortly. We expect well within 3 months, but to be comfortable and not hurried, we've set a 3-month target for ourselves. We're finishing our last chapter. Sujatha is shopping for designers, and we'll notify you all when it's available. We'll make some broadcasts on LinkedIn. And I think we have time for some Q&A now. So Sarah, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got about 5 minutes for a Q&A. And then, well, actually, yeah, Tony, if you could go to that last screen there, and I can probably put it into the chat here as well. We have a little feedback form for you guys. Just you can either follow the QR code, or I'll go ahead and put the link here in the chat. But so if you guys could let us know what you thought of the presentation today, and it will be available by recording for those of you who RSVP'd, that would be great. While I've got you guys doing that in the background, we can go ahead and take some questions. So it looks like, Abhinav, you have your hand raised. Oh, I cannot hear you. If you'd like, you can type your question into the chat. Great.
All right, thank you, Abhinav. I don't see that you have a mute icon, but for some reason your mic isn't transmitting to us. Happy to take the question. So if you're typing that in now, we'll take you up in just a sec. There it goes. Roxanne has a question here, Sarah.
Okay, awesome. Roxanne, did you want to ask a question, or did you just have a comment that you put in there? Oh, oops, I sent that as a direct message. Here we go. Let me put the link back in.
Thank you for your
Okay, so
comment.
yeah, Roxanne was saying that she really needed to hear this. Awesome. That's why we're sharing this today is I know the three of us are very united in wanting to help others. I know this has personally transformed my life just to embark on this journey of growth mindset and deconstructing some of those triggers, figuring out why they exist and how I can diffuse them. So I'm excited to share that with everyone. Okay, so Abhinav says, I think I understand that we need to master the mind, but how?
Good question. So we have to have a clarity on what we mean by master. The mind has a mind of its own. That is the experience of thousands of years, what we call the monkey mind. That's consistent with what Daniel Kahneman's research shows in Thinking Fast and Slow. It's hard for us to understand sometimes and accept that the mind is almost like a chat GPT. As we accumulate data, as we accumulate cultural programming, rules and instructions from our parents, from our religious organizations, from our society, all these programs start to run automatically. And this is why as we get older, we tend to feel a little compressed. The joy seems to go away because the mind gets much more complicated, entangled, and much more automatic. And when we confuse essential self with ego, with monkey mind, with that chat, I call it chat me PT. When we confuse essential self with that, the egg is all scrambled up. So yeah. I want to clarify what we mean by master, Abhinav. We manage the mind, we interact with it, we dance with it, but it's going to go with or without you. However, it is a very, very common experience among mindfulness practitioners that as they gain greater skill and greater experience, that monkey mind, which is trying to constantly get your attention, it starts to get bored because you're not giving it so much importance. And you may find that it kind of slowly drifts away. Now, how long does that take? What practices lead to it? That's a journey. So I want to clarify, can you master the mind? Can you reach a state where you're not constantly distracted and thrown by your ego? Yes, that is absolutely correct. But we're never trying to deliberately attack it or crush it. It'll fight back. It has a mind of its own. So the goal, and one of the people I follow a lot is Sadhguru. Sadhguru is an internationally recognized teacher. He's a twice New York Times bestseller with 2 books, Inner Engineering and Karma. And he's all over YouTube. He's a wonderful, wonderful teacher. And he likes to say, you don't need to turn your mind off. You've been given this beautiful, powerful device that other animals don't have the privilege of having. It's evolved over millions of years. Don't crush it. Don't destroy it. All you need is a little distance between yourself and your psychological drama. We would call the ego the psychological drama. Just a little distance. Even Stephen Covey says this in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that we want to increase the distance between stimulus and response. Just create a little distance, Abhinav. Observe the mind. Yeah. The cloud meditation helps with that. As you observe it, you start to realize it's not you.
I've learned to distinguish between those 2 concepts as the difference between responding and the difference between reacting. So like touching the stove and jumping back right away is important. But if I feel shock or anger as an emotion, I don't necessarily need to react with that knee-jerk reaction. It may be better to take a moment, breathe, recenter myself, evaluate the situation and what's going on. Is there a clear and present danger right now, or am I reacting to an old wound? And then decide how you want to respond. So Thomas had a really great question here. Tony, I'll let it be turned over to you and Sujatha. He's wondering, when you're going through this workbook, is this more of an individual focus, or is there an organizational factor that is also focused on?
Good. It's an individual, but because individuals make organizations and teams, it'll impact the team. If a team is willing and able to do these practices, I've done at FedEx, leading a group of managers, started a workshop with a very simple mindfulness exercise. I was initially a little nervous about whether they'd be receptive to it, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it and said, I wish we could do this more in the workplace. So we are knowledge workers. We use the mind. We're also highly collaborative workers. None of this is foreign to the skills needed to be effective in the workplace. This is why in the Agile growth wheel, self-mastery is at the center for those of us involved in the Agile practices, but it's true of any profession. So the transformation we're seeing in business, we might owe it to Steve Jobs, who really was very public about his Buddhist practices, that bringing this kind of awareness into the workplace makes the work better. It makes the quality of the work better. It aids in retention. It increases psychological safety, creativity. So while it's not written for teams, I think on one-on-one basis and even in group exercises, you can run these kinds of exercises, yes.
Just one thing that I do want to add, right? One simple thing in the organizations when I work with the teams, oftentimes people like to talk and like say a lot of things, like not give, other people to express their thoughts. If we can exercise a simple thing like Scrum Masters or managers, just wait. Pause for a few seconds before you can respond. That makes a big difference.
Yes, Sujatha, and these katas, which start with the breathing, these katas put you in a state where you're not in a hurry. Some of you may have heard the name Lisa Atkins. We mentioned it in the book. She wrote a book called Coaching Agile Teams. I've had the privilege of meeting her. I've had the privilege of being trained by her. And people who interact with Lisa, and I know Sarah has, say the same thing. When you're with Lisa Atkins, the author of that book, you're the only person in the world. That's how present she is. And that is achievable by all of us.
Absolutely. It looks like we have time for probably one or two more questions. I see that Sven has a very profound one for Tony and Sujatha here, and that is, if you're able to reconnect with your essential self, when is it best to let your essential self or yoke lead your life, and when is it not?
Your essential self is leading your life. It should be cluttered by your ego. Your essential self is fundamental. When you remembered your early childhood experience and then now, it's the same you, the same sentient being, the same consciousness. So the good news is you can't destroy your essential self. All you're doing is impeding it. Your ego is impeding it. So good news, you're okay. Now you want to enjoy that, don't you? So the moment is now. You're already your essential self listening to me speak. That is your essential self listening to me through the ego. But you're experiencing this as a sentient being. So good news, it's not gone. I know we've heard in psychology about recovering our inner child. There's some value in that if you had a happy inner child, but not all of us had happy inner children. I had a very disturbed home. So it's not about going back to an earlier period. It's going back to the earliest period. The you beneath everything. And that you is still there.
Awesome. Thank you, Tony. Sven, does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
That was very thoughtful. We're trying to reach some high plane. What we're trying to do is reduce complexity and experience the basics, which are already there. They're inescapable. They're just obfuscated, obscured, impeded.
Awesome. And any final questions?
Thank you, Sven. I'm glad it was helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much. We are at the end of our time for today. I will send out the feedback form, the link to this recording, and the three of ours LinkedIn profiles as well. So if you want to connect with us and ask any further questions later on, you're more than welcome to. Definitely make sure to follow along with Tony and Sujatha as they get ready to launch their workbook. I'm personally really excited to check it out. And if you're not following MaxAgility already, we would love to have you as part of our community. We're online as well. And we are doing these meetups on a monthly basis. And the whole point is to try and become better Agile coaches and Agile professionals by actually caring about people and trying to make the world a better place.
I want to personally invite you to follow me, not because I need, at my age, I'm not looking to be an influencer, but I post on these topics at least twice a week, and there's always new material coming out. So if this is something of interest to you, there are a lot of daily pick-me-ups around these topics, and they're not just positive thoughts for the day. They actually give you some techniques and some theory behind it to strengthen your own mindfulness practices.
Absolutely. Tony's got some really fantastic posts that he makes. I know I personally get a lot of use out of them. Like I'm immediately like, oh, I gotta like think about it like differently today, just from reading about his perspective. So really great resources that we have available for everyone. And yeah, if you need to go, you're more than welcome to go. I can keep the channel open for about 5 more minutes if anybody else wants to stay on for additional questions.
Well, Sujatha and I are happy to stay on. So
Yep.
have a good day, all. And if you want to linger with the
Have a good day.
we'll certainly be willing to take it.
Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Sujatha.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
You all have a wonderful day. Again, we're going to hang out for a little bit, no pressure. If you want to just listen in case someone else has a question or if you have one. Sven?
Steve. Sven, yeah.
Sven, go ahead, please.
Hey, I really appreciate having this. I'm getting into Scrum Agile type framework. It really resonates with me in other levels through just other experiences in my life and how to help people. And I like how everyone's coming from like a very genuine place. I like the aspect that you guys or everybody here kind of brings in some sense of almost religion into it. I've talked to other people who work in Scrum and Agile. They've referenced people like Bruce Lee, be like water, and there's like a mindfulness approach to it, which is huge. Which is huge for me. I also practice aspects of Buddhism and Zen, and it's just having this conversation, hearing more people connecting those patterns of like that present mindfulness. I just really appreciate it. I also foresee a couple of potential roadblocks in the way of how to apply this into a more professional sense, but I think that's part of the journey, right? How do I make this aspect my own? So there might be opportunities in the future for me to reach out to either one of you all to kind of just probe your mind, since you all have kind of experienced different aspects, but we kind of all met here in a certain way. So I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. That's very inspiring to us that you have such passion and interest in the topic. You use the term religion, which for many people can be stressful because of so much unnecessary religious conflict and cruelty over the ages associated with religion. But if by religion we mean a spiritual practice, I support that, because as human beings, we can use the term spirit very generally to mean essential self. I don't know if that's a soul. I don't know about life after death. I know very clearly from the psychological, neurological, and from the meditative practices that there is something at the center. And call it spirit, if you will, but whatever that is, that's life. And discovering it and enjoying it, whether it is finite or infinite, whether it's immortal or mortal, that is what you have. That is who you are. And exploring that, I call a spiritual journey. I'm very comfortable with that, but it's not associated to a particular religious tradition. It's a mindfulness practice. Now, religion implies discipline. It implies ritual. In that sense, there is discipline and ritual to some of this. Yes, the katas. And then if you belong to a center like Sujatha belongs to Isha, that's going to have its own practices. If you belong to Mahayana Buddhism or Zen Buddhism or whatever practice, that's certainly very helpful aid. So pursue whichever tradition you find most useful. But at the bottom, we're all doing the same thing. We're recovering contact with essential self.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I noticed, Roxanne, you said what could be some daily practice for mental strengthening from anxiety and panic disorder. And I'm smiling because 5 years ago, I was medicated for anxiety, for depression, and for PTSD. I didn't mention this earlier, but the fact that I'm a martial artist now and that I'm competing on the world stage is especially poignant because I got into jiu-jitsu for self-defense. I went through 6 different assaults from 6 different people. It wasn't like a domestic situation. I just was picked a lot back in Columbus, Ohio. And yeah, so the meds kind of made me feel like a zombie. They didn't really help very much. So personally, I started with therapy and then I started in jiu-jitsu, and jiu-jitsu was triggering but healing for me because I was able to encounter those situations that triggered anxiety, that triggered stress, that triggered those panicky feelings in myself. I encountered that a lot in competition. And it gave me the opportunity to practice the different katas that they're referring to. So I practiced different breathing modulations, which I would be happy to talk more specifically with you if you'd like to connect with me personally. I practiced a lot of mindset work. So I would go into situations that made me feel stressed. And you don't necessarily need to do that, but when you're in situations that make you feel stressed, look at them as an opportunity to practice those different katas and see what works and what doesn't work. So if you practice a certain breathing set and you're like, hey, I still feel super panicked, try something different next time. There's a lot of different grounding techniques that can be really helpful. There are ones that connect you with your senses. That helps me to derail a panic attack when it's happening. So looking at what are 5 things that you can see, what are 4 things that you can touch, what are 3 things that you can hear, what are 2 things that you can smell, and what's 1 thing that you can taste. Just things that connect you back with your senses will draw you back into the present and get you out of that now, that future, right? Because when you're in a panic attack or an anxiety attack, a lot of times it's grounded in things you're afraid of happening rather than something that's actually happening right now. So connecting back to the here and the now to remind yourself that you're safe right here. If you're not safe in that situation, obviously remove yourself from that situation. But those are some things that worked well for me. I've got a whole toolbox that I've developed over the last 5 years. Different situations call for different tools. I've joked and had truth in it with my brother, actually, who's asked me for some similar advice. And, sometimes you need a screwdriver, sometimes you need a sledgehammer, sometimes a sledgehammer is completely inappropriate, right? So if it's just like a little bit panicked, a little bit anxious, maybe just some breathing. If it's a little more intense, maybe I need to do some grounding exercises. If it's super intense, maybe I need to go dunk my face in cold water. Maybe I need to do something a little more intense. So developing a toolbox, finding things that work for you, and the appropriate response has been really helpful for me. And then really the practicing of it is what made a big difference. I still have to do those practices today. I'm way better than I used to be, but I still get triggered. I still get anxious. I still deal with those nerves. I'm just better prepared to react and respond to them in the way that I want to. So I still get that kind of happening, but this time, instead of being overwhelmed by it and driven by it, I can sit back like with our cloud kata exercise and respond instead of reacting.
One simple thing that you could do on a daily basis too. This is like very, very simple thing, like Sarah said, or something that you have, or something you can feel, right? Every day, I'm sure there's going to be one thing that you're grateful for, right? Just showing that gratitude changes a lot, right? Just brings that positive energy in you first thing in the morning, maybe once during the day and before you go to bed. Right, that positive energy will help as well as along with those other tools that Sarah was mentioning.
And there's a lot here, and trauma is very specific. So we make a point in our book, if you were at the gym trying to get stronger and you were lifting a weight, you would hire a trainer, perhaps, to help you get your routine. If you drop the weight on your foot and break it, you would go to a doctor.
Yeah.
So our work, our katas, our shoe level katas, and yes, they're effective. And Sarah has used similar things from other traditions because, as we said, it's not one size fits all, and we can. But there are cases where there are experts in trauma therapy. Gabor Mata and many people online and privately are especially skilled at helping us disentangle the ego when there have been particular traumas. So another issue, particularly if someone is medicated, is being very careful to work with your doctor to titrate and reduce that, because there are a lot of consequences to sudden withdrawal. I'm personally, on the record, and very publicly, not a fan of medication, but in extreme situations, yes, people have found some relief. In the longer term, it's my very strong opinion that it weakens the unscrambling mechanism, because it almost scrambles you more by making you numb, as Sarah said. So I had a terrible experience that influenced me when I was a middle school teacher. One of my most beautiful and curious and exciting young students, he was about a 10, 11-year-old boy. He was very so-called ADHD. He was very disorganized, he didn't complete assignments, but he was such a marvelously intelligent and curious guy, near genius. And his parents put him on medication. And when I saw him again, he was a zombie, and I almost cried. I'd rather have a 10-year-old boy be disorganized and restless and not complete schoolwork, but be fully alive. And that really created my own personal crusade against the over-medication in the West. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm sure there are severe cases where it's the one thing keeping people from jumping off a cliff, but I'm very suspicious about our hubris, about altering the brain's chemical balance without even knowing how the brain works. We're learning a lot, but we don't know everything. We're throwing things into a black hole. So, but do be cautious. If you're on medication and want to be more alert, don't do it on your own. Get a doctor willing to titrate you and get you back to your regular state. Bruce, you had a question that I'm not sure I could answer, but it's a very good one. I'm familiar with positive intelligence just in passing, but I don't know what the PQ exercise is. Again, I suspect because we're all drawing from similar tech traditions, it might be similar. Do you want to speak briefly to that for those who've chosen to stay? Bruce, what is the PQ exercise?
Bruce, you're on mute.
You're muted, sir.
Oh,
there you are. Welcome.
Dr. Strauss, this is they call PQ exercises, and they're just attacking realizing your saboteurs. For me, I'm a judge, an overachiever, controlling, just by the nature of the business I've been in. Okay, so and realize when those are occurring neurologically, you do some exercises, breathing and meditation a little bit on the spot, and bring out what he calls the sage. Okay, how do you get benefit from those? Okay, it's for a guy like me. I'm going, that's kind of a jerky thing. Okay, but listening to the program and stuff like this, the more the coaches get empathy, more ability to serve and lower their egos to raise the process of your team and stuff like this has really helped me. And I think this what you guys are doing and put out just seems to be the realization of the agile coaches these days, that we're more than just get the job done, get the IT done, going like this. It's all about people and how you raise them up. And if you don't know yourself and you're not technically competent, okay, and can control your ego, then your team's going to suffer. So I think whatever process we do, I think it's important to know yourself really well, okay, and convey that, whatever means you want to use.
Right, Bruce. So I could speak to that. Now you described it. Coactive uses that model. Even ORSC, Organization and Relationship Systems Coaching, talks about personas. So personas, as I've understood it, and I've heard Sadhguru say things that really confirm my understanding, the ego can be broken down into structures. At the most extreme case, when people suffer what's called CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which sadly is caused by childhood abuse, particularly physical, sexual abuse. And I've worked with people who've suffered that. Typically, in those severe situations, the ego subdivides itself, and you can get into what's known as, at the extreme, dissociative personality disorder, where we have distinct selves that interact with various situations for safety and security. But there's a spectrum of dissociation. At the most normal, you might say, level, we all have personas within ourselves. So talking to what in coactive coaching is known as the saboteur, that voice that tells you you can't do it, you're not going to make it. Yes, there's good value in that. And I don't invite people to do this as Agile coaches. I'm able to enter areas, and I don't know why, whether the universe or God invites me into it. I have worked with people with very serious situations within the workplace, and they were willing to dialogue with me about it. In one case, it was a childhood long-term sexual trauma, and I didn't invite it. I made it very clear to her when she raised it. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not a trauma counselor, but I'm a human being. And if you feel brave enough to talk about this, you have my full trust and support, and I will take you as far as you want to go, and it'll be totally confidential. And what we found over the next month is she was able to identify within herself, as you said, Bruce, different personas. And she was able to navigate them and talk to them and be compassionate to them and ask them, what do they want and what are they concerned about? And then she, as essential self, was able to say, thank you. I know you're trying to protect me, but in this situation, I won't exactly need you. And she made contracts with these several personas. I think she had about 3. And she said, when I say such and such, you can help me. But when I tell you such and such, dial it down. I got this. Me, grown-up me, essential me, I got this. So yeah, I think some of this is similar to what you're describing in the PQ, positive intelligence. We don't go too much into that technique of personas, but when you're talking about triggers and understanding them, it touches upon that. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending today. I do want to make sure that we're being respectful of everyone's schedules, so I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. I know a couple of you still had some questions. I've already sent out the links for our personal LinkedIn's, as well as for the corporation. So if you do have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, thank you all so much for attending. Have a great rest of your day.
You're honored. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you all. We hope to stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.